In my defense, a lot of women go on diets. Sometimes we just want to look and feel our best. Sometimes we notice fat accumulating and we miss our teenage bodies. Fasting has a long history in many cultures. Inspired by that, I had been skipping breakfast and lunch, suppressing my hunger with water and coffee. By the time I was done with work, I had just enough energy to make dinner for my boyfriend and me. Everything tastes so much better after deprivation. I didn't think my boyfriend, Vernon, had noticed anything, so I was surprised when he mentioned it at dinner. I was surprised he took me out to begin with. We were both broke and could barely afford rent. Living alone in your mid-20s, it is hardly feasible. But for us, it was better than the alternative. And at first, it was just a nice night. Talking, laughing, drinking a little more than we should. He had just gotten a promotion and was still riding the high days later. As we were finishing up our brick oven pizzas, his voice dropped to a whisper and he leaned conspiratorially over the table. "I'm worried about your eating, Alice. I know you skip meals. I don't mind it now. I mean, you look great, and you haven't lost it anywhere that bothers me." He smiled. Just take it easy. Promise me you'll always be up for nice dinner dates, okay?" It was something between an earnest request and light teasing. I decided to go along with it and promised him I'd have it under control. He changed the topic easily. He didn't even notice that I'd barely touched our pie. He was far too busy taking it all for himself. Lately, Vernon had been kind of absent-minded. I was flattered he'd even noticed a difference. He had been the one to suggest that I lose weight once before. Not because I needed to, but because he wanted me to work on my ambition. You see, after graduating college a few years ago, I still work in retail. He, on the other hand, earned a decent income as a junior scientist. Same degree, different ambitions. Also, he liked that I was a part-time worker. It gave me more time to cook for him, and that was a talent that I had perfected by the end of high school. After paying the bill, Vernon said, "Delicious, but not as good as your cooking." I went to bed happy. So I didn't think much about my promise, and I began to skip dinner as well. I started going days on end without eating, simply drinking as much water as possible. Then a few days after our dinner date, I was jogging through the state park about half an hour from my house. I spent a lot of time there. It's gorgeous. It's got these tall, statuesque trees and adorable North American woodland creatures that scamper around in the shadows. I had forgotten to eat the night before, and I felt dizzy. So dizzy, I barely registered the white rabbit running across my path. I don't even remember hitting the forest floor, but I remember the world tilting sideways. For a second, I probably passed out, although I'm not really sure. When I was feeling well enough, I sat up and looked around. Nothing had changed, except the rabbit had scurried off into the distance. I checked my phone. Only a few minutes had passed. Though I was still a little dizzy, I stood up, leaning against a tree for balance. Vernon was coming home from work in a couple of hours, and I hadn't even started dinner yet. I scanned the forest as I waited for this dizzy spell to pass. Several feet behind me, a middle-aged man had been walking his dog. By the time I had stood up, he was speed walking past me. He didn't stop to ask if I was okay, but he gave me a friendly smile as he went by. At least, I thought he was the same man. From a distance, he seemed like a regular guy, maybe late 50s, but up close, he looked like he was on the verge of death. His fingers, they were thin as matchsticks. They protruded out from a t-shirt that hung limply off him as if he were a coat rack. His skin was stretched so thinly that I could make out the muscles in his face. Even his dog beside him looked malnourished. It was some kind of terrier mix, and the way he smiled at me, I felt compelled to comment. "Cute dog." The man, he stopped in his tracks, a frown deepening the many lines across his face. "He's not edible, okay? You can't eat him." He picked up his dog, body shaking from the weight. "Eat him?" I wondered if I had misheard, and I felt almost silly even saying it out loud. I must have looked as confused as I felt, because the man scanned me from head to toe and began to laugh. "Sorry, honey. I get paranoid. Didn't realize you were being friendly. Okay, have a good day, and don't let your family know you were hanging around here. It can be pretty dangerous." The poor man. I realized almost instantly that he must be suffering from some sort of dementia, because nothing he said made any sense. The woods were located in a relatively affluent suburb. And why would he even mention my family? Maybe he thought I was some high schooler playing hooky? Are you walking alone?" I asked. I wasn't sure exactly how to deal with the situation, but I doubted it was safe for him to be by himself. He probably wandered off from some old folks' home, and they were sending people out looking for him. "Maybe I can walk you home?" "Don't worry about me. I'm stronger than I look. Plus," he lifted his sweater, revealing a holstered gun attached to his belt, "I never forget my protection." I nodded. "Well, have a nice day then." At this point, I was doing everything I could to hide the growing fear on my face. I didn't want to upset or startle him. Who knew how bad his mood swings could get after all? I had never talked to anyone with dementia, but I saw a training video once while doom scrolling. "Just go along with their delusions, or they'll lash out," the narrator explained over a scene of an old woman playing make-believe with an eerily realistic baby doll. I let him walk past several feet before I discreetly ducked behind the trees, shaking legs bending so it would be too low to see over the boulders nearby. I didn't know if the pounding all over my body was from the fall or the fear, but I thought about my own grandparents shortly before they died, and I quickly dialed 911. Almost immediately, I was redirected by a voice message.
"We're sorry. We are experiencing a higher than normal call volume. You can either hang up and redial later, or wait on the phone. A representative will be with you shortly."
I'd never heard of emergency services putting people on hold, but what could I do? I waited by the phone for almost half an hour before hanging up. By now, the old man, he could be anywhere. As I waited, I thought about all the possibilities. Maybe I had hit my head and gotten a concussion. Maybe that's why everything seemed so off. Besides, I'd never called 911 before. Maybe this was a common experience. Maybe the movies just make 911 seem always available as some sort of twisted pro-government propaganda. I was tired of crouching, and although my head still hurt, I was terrified of seeing the old man again. I turned around and began to trek out of the forest and back to the parking lot. It was the same forest I had initially walked through, just quieter. Animals still scampered around me, and the trees still blocked most of the sun. However, this time, I noticed more animal corpses on the path and by the trees. I almost stepped on a couple before realizing it was better to walk with my head down. After a bit of stumbling, I was back to where I started, staring at the parking lot. Before, there had been several cars. Now, only two. Mine and this run-down minivan. At the playground beside the cars, two children were playing on the swings. A man and a woman watched them. As soon as I saw them, they began to look back. They seemed to be avoiding direct eye contact, instead staring at my body. I waved, not knowing what else to do, and the man waved back. Like the old man, the family was severely malnourished. Although the children weren't facing me, I could see the knobs of their vertebrae straining against clothes that would have likely fit a toddler. I couldn't tell if the adults watching were the parents or the grandparents. Wrinkles covered every inch of their skeletal faces, but they were dressed like people in their early 30s. Similarly, the children could have been anywhere from 4 to 12 years old. The parents said something to their children and started walking towards me. Initially, I took a small step backwards. It wasn't unusual for people to chat with strangers in the forest, but it also wasn't usual. My car was right behind me, so as I was walking to my car, they were walking towards me. We met in the middle. Up close, they were even less alive. "Excuse me," I said, attempting to sidestep them. They moved with me. The children continued to swing, but slowly, barely moving their legs. We stood like this for a few seconds when finally the woman spoke. "You're bleeding," she said, pointing to a small scab on my knee that I had gotten from falling earlier. I hope you don't mind. It's been a hard year. I just lost my job, and our family's been struggling. We were wondering if... oh God, this is embarrassing. Emery, we're not beggars, okay? But our children are. They love to swing and be active. We just want to give them all the life we had. The life you have." I didn't see a weapon, but there was no one around. And as weak as they looked, it was still 2 against 1. I fished out my wallet and opened it, showing them the bills I'd brought with me. Thankfully, I had the foresight to leave my debit card and credit card at home. Vernon thought it was safer to only bring them when necessary. I guess he was right. "I have like $100, I said quietly. "You can have some if you want." They looked at each other, their eyes scrunched. The woman shrugged. The man almost smiled. "I forget how out of touch you guys can be. We don't need $100. We need that," the man said, and he pointed at my scab. "It will just be a second," the woman said. "Then you can start heading back home." "You want my scab?" I thought about turning around and running back into the forest, but I remembered the children, who were now staring back at me. What would they think seeing a stranger run in fear from their parents? I'd wait until the situation escalated. Maybe this was another bizarre misunderstanding. "We want you to talk to our kids," said the man. "It'll take less than a minute. Our daughter, she's only 8 years old. I can tell you love kids. You're a kind person, ain't you?" He looked back at his kids and whispered, "We have your license plate memorized, and we've made a lot of dangerous friends in this town. So it's in everybody's best interest if we just get this done with. I promise they'll only take a minute, okay?" For some reason, I believed him. Maybe I was naive, but he had a wild look in his eye. I would just go along with their game and then drive away. Simple enough. I nodded. Good. Walk up to him. I don't want them wasting any more energy today." The 3 of us walked through the mulch surrounding the play equipment and stood in front of the children. The girl's stomach bulged from below her shirt. The boy was smiling at me like I had brought him a bar of chocolate. "Our friend has agreed to feed you guys, and lucky for you, she's healthy enough for you to drink as much as you want. Probably full of strong iron." He flexed theatrically and the girl laughed. "Feed? I started. The father held my shoulder tightly. I didn't have any food on me. But then I remembered the comments about my scab. I froze beneath his touch, hoping my suspicions would be proven false. They weren't. "Youngest first," the mother said. Her son made an exaggerated pouty face, but didn't say anything. The girl slowly got out of her swing and crawled before me. With tiny fingers, she picked at my scab until the wound was open again. Then her mouth suctioned around my knee, and she began to suck. It felt like a wet pinch, slightly ticklish. I looked out at the forest. I had never felt so disgusted with myself. The girl slurped and tongued the blood for almost a minute before her dad interrupted. "Too much is bad for your health. Give your brother a turn." Next, it was the boy's turn. His mouth was slightly drier, and his teeth pressed deeply into my skin. He was pinching the skin around the scab as well, attempting to bring the blood up to the surface. Unlike his sister, his mouth was covered with blood as he finished. I wiped my knee off with my sleeve. The parents thanked me. The children thanked me. I stared at the forest behind me, and the children went back to playing, digging a small hole in the mulch. The parents thanked me again and asked where I lived. There was no threat implied. They just wanted to make small talk. Politely, I rebuffed them, and I walked across the asphalt, and I stepped into my car. I made sure to lock it immediately. At least, then I felt safe. I put in my address, and I began to drive. As I drove on the highway, I moved slowly and looked into each car that passed by. Although there was less traffic than expected, the roads were far from deserted. Several ambulances and police cars passed my window. Every driver I saw was noticeably underweight, with tired eyes facing the road and hands limply gripping the steering wheel. Every driver, that is, except for one. A man driving a Porsche. He was thin but looked relatively healthy. The billboards I passed were somehow even stranger. One featured a morbidly obese woman. With rolls of fat hanging from her belly, they seemed to engulf her as she lay by the beach wearing a thong and a tiny bikini top. She was so obese that I wondered if they'd used Photoshop. In her hand was a loaf of bread. Underneath her, the text read, "Get fat fast with Molly's Loaves." Another billboard showed a chubby man proposing to an obese woman. On another, a fat young child was playing checkers with a similarly chubby old man. Each ad was the same. Regardless of what they were selling, the models were consistently overweight. I had never seen these advertisements before, despite having driven on this road countless times. After exiting the highway, I drove through the downtown area of my neighborhood. Restaurants that once served hundreds were either empty or transformed into junk stores. Everyone walking on the sidewalks was so thin they had to stop every few steps to steady themselves. I saw an older woman fall. A group of teenagers stepped over her without pausing their animated conversation. Most of the adults, however, looked around as they walked. They didn't make any small talk. They just hurried as fast as their weak legs could carry them. I drove by my town's most popular grocery store. There were numerous cars parked in the parking lot and on the surrounding street, many of which were parked illegally. Honestly, I was reminded of Black Friday, only worse. A line of people waited in front of the store, trailing through the parking lot and onto the sidewalk. There were several accidents on the road, and I found myself in stop-and-go traffic for a few blocks before the crowds thinned into an eerie emptiness. My apartment building looked the same, at least. I parked and headed towards the entrance. I walked up the stairs and shuffled through my purse until I found the keys. Then I unlocked the door and stepped inside. My apartment was the same as I had left it. Sparse furniture, minimal decorations, a small flat-screen TV, and some clothes strewn haphazardly on the floor. I was relieved by the familiarity, and I settled down on the couch. I could have fallen asleep, honestly, until I remembered I still had to make dinner for me and Vernon. In my fridge, there was one half-empty bottle of milk and a large bowl of grapes. Some of the grapes had no protective skin, as if someone had peeled it off. I tried the freezer. Empty. The cabinets contained several boxes of cereal. It goes without saying, this was not the kitchen I left this morning. Feeling defeated, I ate a handful of grapes and decided I'd make us cereal when Vernon got home. Although I was starving, I didn't want to waste my daily calorie allowance. I sat by the TV. I'd read accounts of people misremembering things and waking up in the wrong places. They could spend days, months, or even years in complete confusion. Thankfully, those were old stories, and now we have the internet. I searched for food shortages. Hundreds of articles came up, many of which were discussing particular details. Some families are resorting to eating their elderly relatives. Articles advising people to stay home after dark to avoid hungry street gangs. What's this? An opinion piece on a new movie that the author referred to as trite food porn? Okay. So I searched for food shortages on Wikipedia. The first result was titled The Contamination of 1999. That was the year I was born. I read, captivated by the words. Apparently, in the fall of 1999, the vast majority of the world's food had become contaminated by an invisible and almost omnipresent virus. Millions of pounds of seemingly perfectly good meats, fruits, vegetables, and flowers were causing the world's population to flock to hospitals. Although most survived, they were bedbound for several days and unable to eat anything. As soon as they were well enough that they could eat, if they ate more contaminated food, they'd just be sick again. Scientists had yet to discover a vaccine, and there was no natural immunization. As a result, all items sold in stores had to be verified as virus-free, a practice that has continued into the 2020s. The latest estimate suggested that only 6% of our food is viable. Wow. I turned off my phone, downed 3 cups of water, and busied myself with household chores. I mean, what else could I do? Either I had severe memory loss, which honestly was a strong possibility, or somehow I'd been transported. My heart shook beneath my rib cage, and the small amount of food in my belly shook like an internal tsunami. About an hour later, I heard the door unlock, and I rushed to greet my boyfriend. Except he wasn't my boyfriend. Not exactly. Years of poor nutrition had obviously prevented him from reaching his full potential, and he stood a few inches shorter than the person I'd seen just this morning. Honestly, he looked about 10 years older, and he had already lost most of his hair. The few strands that remained were this light shade of gray, and he stood hunched over, trying to balance himself on our dining room table. When his eyes met mine, they were bloodshot. Now, I knew that he'd be skinnier, but I didn't expect him to be so old. "Are you one of Alice's friends?" he asked, staring at me inquisitively. "I'm Vernon, the boyfriend. Where is she right now anyway? She was supposed to have dinner with me tonight. Guess she forgot it was a one-on-one thing, huh?" "Vernon, I hesitated, and I thought through my options quickly. I walked closer so my face was more visible. I expected to see some level of recognition in his eyes, but he just stared back blankly at me. How could he sleep beside me for 2 years and not recognize me? Maybe the person he slept beside was so deformed by a lifetime of starvation? And yet, I managed to recognize him instantly. "You really don't recognize me, do you?" I stepped even closer until we were standing only a few feet apart. By now, his expression had devolved from mild curiosity to a paranoid suspicion. He backed away slowly. Holy shit, you look just like Alice. Are you guys related?" "Alice?" he called into an otherwise empty apartment. When he heard no response, he began sidestepping to the cutlery drawer. "Vernon, please, I don't know how to explain, but..." His hand reached into the knife drawer while still smiling at me in a way that may have seemed polite to a stranger, but I could tell it was obviously forced. "You don't know where Alice is, do ya?" he asked. I think she's having cramps in the bathroom. I haven't seen her," I said. "She invited me here for supper. We We were friends way back in high school, and I was in the neighborhood. If she's having cramps, then you should probably go. Besides, she didn't tell me you'd be here," he added. I got the hint. Would he even believe me if I told him the truth? No. He was always so practical. For my own safety and sanity, I needed to get the hell out of there. "Okay, well, tell Alice I said goodbye. I don't want to bother her." I turned around and headed straight for the door. I didn't even hear him behind me. He was so light. It felt like he floated towards me. All I knew was the sudden sensation of his arm wrapped around my neck. His other arm pressed against the back of my head, tightening the choke. Thankfully, my chin was positioned slightly downward, so much of the weight of his forearm rested slightly below my mouth. Still, he easily could have yanked my head back if he wanted to, applying his full strength to my neck. "Why the fuck do you have Alice's purse?" Vernon whispered. Spit dribbled from his open mouth into my forehead. I didn't think Vernon would kill, not even in this world, but I was scared of what could happen accidentally. A few months ago, I watched this women's self-defense video on how to escape a situation like this. The comments for the video were, let's just call them mixed. Some said it would work, others said it would just piss off your attacker, but I had no other option. So I pulled my lighter out from my purse and quickly lit it on his arm. If he'd been tougher, filled with more adrenaline, maybe he wouldn't have let go. Maybe we would have both burst into flames. But I knew my boyfriend, and I knew what he was capable of handling. Immediately, he shrieked and backed away from me. I didn't wait for him to calm down. I ran faster than I'd ever run before, even though I was dizzy, even though I was terrified. I ran down the stairs and slammed the apartment door closed, and then I hopped into my car. After one quick look, I drove faster than the speed limit out of there. My phone rang. Vernon. I ignored it, and it rang again, this time accompanied by a text message. So I turned off the ringer and pulled over into a nearby lot. "There was some fat girl in our apartment, Alice. Where the fuck are you?" "I'm staying at my parents' for a few nights," I texted back. "Family emergency. The girl was an old friend. Just a little weird. I told her to grab my purse for me when I leave. She must not have realized I left. Please leave me alone. I'll be back soon. I promise." "Do whatever you want. Just text me beforehand next time. I got some real bad vibes. Thought I was gonna have to kill a bitch. Hope your family's okay." I sent a kissy face as a reply, and I drove a few blocks until I was sufficiently far away from the apartment complex. Then I began to scroll through my phone. Pictures of my boyfriend and me littered the camera roll. Of course, the me that existed on the screen was much thinner, several pounds below my goal weight even. But she still looked like me, same height, same features. I mean, even our hair was the same. Again, I felt anger and an intense sadness. How could Vernon not recognize me? How could he kick me out like that? I just had to accept that this was no longer my world. Clearly, the me who was in the pictures was gone, and I would just have to replace her. I'd have to forget about the old world entirely and focus on how things worked here. So I wiped at the tears that had begun to form, and I puzzled over my options. Now, I could go to a hotel, but I only had $100 or so on me, and my credit card remained buried in my underwear drawer. Most banks were closed, so I'd have to wait until tomorrow to withdraw money. Also, somehow the idea of sleeping amongst rooms and rooms of strangers was seeming less and less appealing after my run-in with Vernon. If he was capable of murdering a woman who, despite being several pounds heavier and posed no apparent threat, what in the hell were others capable of? As much as I hated to admit it, it would probably be in my best interest to stay with my parents. I scrolled through my contacts, but I couldn't find my dad. Thankfully, I remembered his number, but when I called, a stranger picked up. Fuck, I thought. I'd have to call my mom. My parents and I hadn't spoken in about 3 months. Enough time for me to gain a decent amount of weight without them becoming too suspicious. Also, I missed my father, and despite the years of constant disrespect, I missed my mother too. It would feel comforting to stay with them. My mom picked up. Hello? Alice? Hi, Mom. Sorry for not calling. I know it's been a while. I've been missing you. I tried to keep my voice steady. Been a while? Alice, it's been almost 2 years. What kind of bullshit is that? 2 years. I had been a persona non grata to them for 2 years. But why? In reality, until recently, I'd tried to see them at least once a month. 3 months was the longest stretch I'd ever been without contact. I'm sorry. Everything's been just so crazy recently, and I'm so sorry. I was crying now, but I wasn't sure if it was out of guilt or desperation. I just needed someone to help me. Someone like my father. I don't know what you want from me, my mother said. She sounded annoyed. I just need a place to stay for a few nights, I admitted. Vernon and I it doesn't matter. I just need somewhere to stay. Alice, I can barely afford to feed myself. Now is really not a good time. Look, I have to go. Wait, Mom, I'll pay rent and everything, I promise. An awkward silence followed, but she wasn't hanging up. Since I turned 18, she has insisted that I support myself financially. We weren't necessarily poor, but she insisted on living above her means. Designer dresses, fancy cruises, a private cook for special occasions. I knew money was tight. I heard my parents fighting about it constantly. Look, fine. If you can pay for your own room and food, fine. Since we haven't spoken, I assume you'll need the new address. I'll text it to you later. Mom, I said, can I talk to Dad? What did you say? Talk to who? I said. I paused, and then I remembered how Dad's contact wasn't on my phone, and how my mom said she didn't have enough food to feed herself without even mentioning Dad. I remembered my dad, standing at 6'7", devouring slices of pizza like they were potato chips. He was constantly hungry. It didn't take long for me to put 2 and 2 together. I said I'll talk to you later. Goodbye. Alice. I hung up, half expecting my mom to call back, but she didn't. My crying had devolved into blubbering as I thought of my father. The man who would read books with me in elementary school, introduced me to 80s movies and old school games, the man who protected me from my mother's tirades. That man was gone. Or maybe these memories and that man never existed here. I mean, who knew how long I got to spend with him and what he was like? Consistently pushed to the brink of death and then succumbing to it all. Still, it all just hurt too much to contain. About 10 minutes later, towards the end of my crying fit, my mom sent me the address. I plugged it into my phone. It was about 2 hours away. My stomach reminded me of its hunger, a deep, pulsating emptiness expanding from within me. For better or worse, I'd need to eat now. I didn't want to deal with the chaos of the supermarket. Instead, I stopped at a nearby gas station store, making sure to fill up my car as well. The door to the store, it was locked, and I had to bang on it several times before the cashier let me in. He then immediately locked the door behind me. Inside the store were the usual sights. You know, the bright fluorescent lights, the freezer filled with drinks, rows of shitty junk food. I smiled politely at the cashier and thanked him for opening the door. He was a young guy about my age, and he looked surprisingly healthy. Skinny, of course, but healthy. Truthfully, I envied his slender physique, yet healthy skin and gorgeous long black hair. He was flipping through a magazine and barely acknowledged my existence, which of course made him all the more attractive. Not that I could focus on anything but food, though. I scanned through the aisles, hoping to locate the healthiest item. I didn't even notice the prices until I picked up a granola bar, looked at the ingredients, and then put it back. That one bar was nearly $200, and the candy next to it was about $300. Desperately, I began running through the store, looking at every price. $400 for a bag of chips, $700 for thinly sliced bread, $250 for a half-rotten apple. I ran out of breath and strength and collapsed against the freezer. Again, I was crying. I was too weak to even think of a plan. I wish I'd had lunch earlier, or even just stuffed myself with cereal back at the apartment. Or better yet, had the foresight to grab my damn credit card. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe the store took Apple Pay? You all right? I looked up to see the cashier crouched a few feet away from me. The look of indifference he held earlier had softened into a kind smile. I'm so sorry, I said, immediately wiping my eyes on my sleeve. I just can't. I'm just so hungry. I'm sorry about that scene, I added lamely. Then I laughed. I probably look like a crazy person. It's all right. I understand, he said, handing me a tissue and holding up his arm, which was wrapped several times over with bandages. Believe it or not, you're actually one of our saner customers. Some dude today totally tried to eat me when I wouldn't take his year-old expired coupon. I laughed again. It must be terrible working here. I do my best, he shrugged. His smile turned into a smirk. I get some of your type too. Let me guess. Parents cut you off. You're finally learning what it's like for the rest of us? Sort of. At this point, I was used to people assuming I came for money. In their eyes, it was apparent. How else could a young person afford to look so well-fed? I really don't know what to do about food now. It's tough. He looked away for a second. When he made eye contact again, his gaze, it seemed intense. Have you ever been to a feeding arena? No. I didn't want to add that I had no idea what a feeding arena was, since I suspected not knowing about it was going to draw suspicion from the first person who actually wanted to help me. There are crumbs all over the place. I mean, sometimes I go there just to pick up scraps. And honestly, a girl like you, they'd probably give you free food anyway. I guess I could go, I said. I still had no idea what a feeding arena was, but free food did sound appealing. There's one about a few blocks from here. I think it's ending at 6:30. Entry fee isn't terrible. I mean, it's just like $20, and of course, you'll need to bring a little offering. He fiddled with something in his pocket for a few seconds and then handed me a wrapped stick of gum. Lately, they've been accepting gum. Thank you. I appreciate everything. What's the name of what's the Artie's All-American Arena? He said, chuckling. It's only a 3-minute drive. Okay. I stood up. My body was awkwardly swaying from exhaustion and hunger. The cashier, whose name tag I noticed said Lewis, helped me to balance myself. Thank you so much, Lewis. You are literally the kindest person I've talked to all day. He laughed and opened up the fridge behind me, fishing out a bottle of water. It was the only item in the refrigerator that was at all reasonably priced. On the house, he told me, and I drank as much as I could before heading out of the store. Lewis, he locked the door behind me. After getting into my car, I looked back towards the door. He was standing there watching. His friendly smile had faded. When he saw that I had seen him, he returned it and waved. I drove off with a very sour taste in my mouth. The sun was only just beginning to set as I arrived. Artie's All-American Arena was located on the same block as Vernon's Preferred Liquor Store. Now, before all of this began, these grounds housed a ShopRite and a large parking lot. Now, however, against this slightly smaller lot, there was a large gray coliseum, roughly 3 stories tall. And although I couldn't see the entire structure from the street, I estimated it was about the width of a football stadium. The parking lot, it was almost full. And as I drove through looking for a spot, I noticed the golden archway in front of the stadium. Beneath it, there was this large black door where a handful of slim yet muscular young men stood out in front of it, and they were eyeing this parking lot suspiciously. I watched as a teenage kid handed them cash and took out a loaf of bread. They looked at each other nodding and opened the doors for him. From the inside, that's when I first heard the cheering. I finally found a space a few rows from the entrance and got out of my car. Without looking, I almost ran into this older woman, and I guess it was her husband. The woman had her twig hands on her hips, glaring at me as I staggered by.
Is she one of the whores you wasted food on, you stupid asshole?
She asked her husband, who was leaning up against his minivan.
No, Martha. Let's just go home,
he said.
No. Come on, let's watch. I want to see what's so entertaining for you.
The two of them charged ahead of me, the woman dragging her husband like a disobedient child. They walked up to the muscular men and pulled out 2 20s.
We have 2 Kinoko bars,
the woman said.
Let us in.
She opened up her purse and let the guard standing in front look inside. The guard shook his head.
We don't take those anymore,
he said with a surprisingly high-pitched voice.
Are you serious?
The woman grumbled.
Sorry, ma'am. New rules. We've gotten too many complaints.
The woman huffed again and turned to her husband, who seemed very relieved. After scowling at the guards and then me, she walked away with her hands across her chest. Her husband followed obediently. Confused and nervous, I approached the guards.
Here,
I said, handing them my $20.
And, I brought some gum,
I awkwardly said.
Do you have an ID?
The guard asked.
I have my driver's license.
I handed it to him. He nodded, and the guard stepped aside. As I walked through them, I tried not to look at their faces. I knew they were staring at me. I was never the prettiest girl, but in reality, no matter how you look at it, men, especially older men, they tend to stare. I looked down at their feet. Each wore these steel-toed boots with jeans tucked in, and they opened the door. Inside, I was engulfed in several rows of bleachers, stretching to the top and circling around the stadium. The seats were about half full, with large groups huddled in them. A few sat alone, wearing baseball caps, particularly shrinking away from the others. There were about 2 women for every 10 men. The crowd ranged in age from teenagers to the elderly, but the vast majority fell on the younger end of middle age. Not, of course, that the ages were all that obvious. I mean, everyone's skin dripped from their faces and they moved slowly. Some of the skinniest men were hunched over, holding onto their knees for support. Anyone with a little bit of energy left spent it laughing, howling, and chucking food at the platform below. I couldn't see what they were watching until I stood against the fence and stared down below. What I saw just a few feet below me was terrifying, and it prevented me from leaving my spot. I stood up there for almost a full minute before an older man bumped into me and yelled at me to go find a seat. A chubby woman sat in the middle of the concrete several feet below on the ground level. She was wearing nothing but a bikini top and Daisy Duke shorts. Audience members aimed food at her face. A few people threw crumpled dollar bills. When something hit her, the audience, it seemed to scream in delight. There was food scattered all around her. Several broken apples to her left, slices of cheese to her right, and loaves of bread scattered throughout. They covered almost the entire stadium. And the smell, it was overwhelming, like I had stuck my head in a dirty trash bin. I couldn't even imagine what the woman must have smelt as she crawled across that dirty floor, devouring as much as she could, heaving handfuls of food into her mouth. Her body was covered in sweat and crumbs. What she couldn't stuff in her mouth dribbled out onto the floor, only for her to, with shaking fingers, grab and push back against her outstretched lips. Every few seconds, she stopped to cough or swallow, which earned laughter from the stadium above. She looked up, not at me, but in my direction, and I noticed her mascara running. She was crying. The man who bumped into me was likely old enough to be my father. As he passed me, his hand grabbed my lower thigh, squeezing hard enough for his chopstick fingers to dig deeply into my flesh. I instinctively bolted towards the bleachers, easily finding a seat a few feet away from 3 older men who stared at me conspicuously before turning their attention back to the show. As the girl in front of us crawled and cried, I scanned the rows for crumbs thrown too weakly to reach the platform. Within a minute, a few noodles, covered in hair, landed beside me. I hesitated, but my hunger overpowered my disgust. I grabbed the noodles and stuffed them into my mouth. The hair stuck to my teeth, and I pulled the strands out as best I could. There was some other fruits in the rows above me. I swept them into my purse. Awkwardly, I climbed to the next level, discreetly scanning for food. As my hunt continued, a part of me wanted to crawl like the girl, but I knew better. I had to be inconspicuous. I found a peach, looked at it, and I began to eat. I tried to cover my face with my hair, but apparently my attempts at discretion failed. A few men noticed me and laughed. I stuffed the peach into my purse. Unfortunately, those men began to whisper to the group sitting below them. They too turned to stare. They reached out to grab me, weakly pawing at my skin and laughing. Soon I had grown my own miniature audience of around 5 or 6.
You hungry bitch!
Someone howled at me. He then threw an Oreo at my head. A few others, they followed suit. Soon I was covered in carrots, broccoli, potato chips. A half-eaten pizza slice landed on my shoe. I tried to shield myself, but they wouldn't stop throwing. I tried to stand up, but hands behind me held me down. One of the men sitting next to me reached across my lap, grabbed the slice, and shoved it into my face. It blocked my nose and my mouth so I couldn't breathe. There were just so many men, and I couldn't do anything to fight. I swallowed the pizza in 2 bites. Another person threw an orange. It landed on my head and bounced down to the floor. I covered my face in my lap, squeezing my legs. Some weak hands attempted to pull me upright, but quickly they grew tired. Giving up, they stopped, and they simply covered me in whatever they had brought with them. Ham slices slapped my arms. A half-melted chocolate bar slapped my legs. I didn't care. I just stayed curled up in my ball. These were not people taunting, no. They were zombies, tossing gunk at me for not entertainment, but because they had no control of their bodies. Finally, it stopped when a loud gunshot erupted.
Hey, I'd like to remind everybody that the food is for entertainment purposes only,
a deep voice said from my left below the bleachers. I looked down, and a handful of what I could only imagine to be yogurt dripped from my bangs. One of the muscular security guards stood before me. He had his gun pointed at our section.
Please refrain from feeding guests.
A low muttering of annoyance, as well as some grunts of agreement, echoed around me. I tried desperately to get the gunk off me, although most of the attention had migrated to the main show. A few of the men, they were still staring and laughing at my pathetic attempts to clean myself. As I squeezed the yogurt out of my hair and brushed the crumbs from my skin, I felt the ache of embarrassment, stronger even than hunger. I was full, and I felt disgusted. Someone tapped me on the shoulder, an older woman, thin but obviously not malnourished, and she smiled at me.
Come with me, honey,
she said.
Let's clean you up and find you somewhere else to sit, okay?
She handed me a towel, which I quickly used to wipe as much of myself as I could reach. Some of the more slippery sauces had dripped beneath my jeans and t-shirt, but I didn't feel comfortable sliding my hands beneath the fabric. The woman reached out, and I caught her hands in mine. Steadying myself, I stood up and followed her. We walked together off the bleachers, earning some annoyed shouts and grumbling. We walked along the ground floor against the fence that separated us from the woman, who was now deep on the pavement below, continuing her consumption. Had I looked so pathetic? Had I gagged as she did? No, I wasn't that bad, I assumed. I mean, I hoped I maintained some semblance of dignity. You have to be subtle if you want to eat here, the woman explained. Just sit down in one place for long enough, and someone will happen to throw something in your direction, usually by accident. You don't run around desperately, making a huge spectacle. I'm sorry, I said as we sat in the middle of a deep row within the stadium. No one around had seen my groveling, but my presence earned some stares regardless. The woman glared at them until they looked away. This was my first time, she laughed. Obviously. A grape landed next to her, and the old lady, very casually, picked it up and plopped it in her mouth. See? That's how you do it. So, that's why you're here? I asked. To eat? I couldn't imagine this sweet old lady getting much entertainment from watching the girl wriggling below us. She wasn't even looking down. Instead, she looked to her right, smiling slightly. No, honey, no. My son, he comes here every day. She frowned. It's the only time I get to see him. He doesn't even know I'm here. We've lost touch. He comes here every day, she repeated. He's quit his job. He won't get help. What can I do? She turned to me suddenly. What can I do right? I nodded. It's a hard situation, I said. Somehow, this was enough to satiate her. Do you see that girl down there? She pointed to the girl who had, after presumably noticing the crowd thinning out slightly, begun to roll around in the filth. From where we sat, I noticed that some of the slop around her wasn't sauce like I initially thought. It was vomit. I nodded and tried not to look at the show. A chocolate chip landed on the row below me, and I scooped it up, stuffing it into my purse as she spoke. I used to teach her back in elementary school. She was one of the smarter kids. Loved helping out. She told me she wanted to be a nurse. Can't she still become a nurse? The woman laughed without it reaching her eyes. After this, probably not. She'll probably do a few more years of feeding and then retire comfortably. You know, I heard the pay is nice. Oh. We sat silently, listening to the roars of the crowd and picking up bits of food that fell beside us. Due to the increasing darkness of dusk, harsh fluorescent lights had been turned on. They shined above us, illuminating the crowd. As I stared at the desperate onlookers, I couldn't understand why they threw away their food when so many of them looked like they were on the brink of death. Another thought struck me as well. Despite the obvious hunger, everyone was relatively well dressed and drove the same cars I'd seen that morning. I certainly hadn't seen any for sale signs on the houses and businesses, except for the restaurants. Clearly, hunger was the price most were willing to pay for this luxury. I thought of myself and the skipped meals, and then I understood. A chant rang out, starting from somewhere to my left.
No haste, no haste, no haste.
I didn't understand until I saw the girl get back on her knees and hold her hands behind her head. She then began to inch around the stadium, her face buried deep into the morsels and into the cement. She dragged herself with surprising speed, only looking up to catch her breath. Blood poured from her chin and onto the cement, and food covered her face and hair. The woman next to me shook her head, but even she was smiling. The crowd, it clapped furiously. Then, the girl began to make a pile of whatever she could find. mashed potatoes, half-eating fruit, etc. Like a child leaping into a pile of leaves, she jumped into it. There just wasn't enough cushioning. She landed on her leg and it bent in the wrong direction. She screamed, but most of the crowd cheered, although some of the men beside me seemed concerned. "It happens like this," the woman told me. "The more pain they go through, the better the reviews. Some of them even pull out their own teeth. This one's a newbie. She's testing the waters." Trying to sit up gracefully, but ultimately failing, the girl stuck her fingers down her throat. She gagged and tried again, and gagged again. The crowd went quiet, waiting. Ultimately, she was successful. It surrounded her like a marsh. Again, she attempted, and again, she was successful. Claps from the audience seemed to propel her, and soon the stink was so strong and distinct. She spewed in circles. Her eyes were hidden under her hair. I think she was trying to look away. Clumps of dollar bills flew from random directions, most of them landing in the puddles. Reaching into my purse, I took out my gum and threw it, attempting to aim it at her. Instead, it landed several feet away on top of some ravaged hot dog buns. If I stayed any longer, I too would vomit. I don't think gum's going to help her out all that much, said the old woman. She laughed. "I have to go," I told her. "But thank you for helping. Stay safe out there, sweetie. It's not worth it." She looked me in the eyes for several seconds, biting her lip. "This place, it's worse than a casino. The more you hate yourself, the harder it is to look away. I really wish I could," she added so quietly that I may have imagined it. I jogged out of the arena, ignoring whatever they threw at me. As the girl continued to vomit, the crowd grew rowdier and rowdier. A few of the men who had covered me in food started to weakly jog after me. The guards yelled at them. Some, they didn't care and continued until the guard took out his gun. Some simply reached out from the bleachers with grimy, long, thin fingers. As I was about to open the door and leave, an older man jumped on top of me, knocking me down to the floor. He straddled me, lying his chest against mine and grabbing beneath my head. I couldn't shake him off, so I just lay there, trying not to cry because I knew crying would only make him more aggressive. He fondled my belly with an outstretched palm until a security guard ran up to him and pulled him off. I turned away as the guard kicked the man repeatedly in the face. There was discord all over the arena. Some young men were grabbing at each other's wives, which prompted angry exchanges of fists and yelling. Others were taking off their clothes and aiming them at the platform. They landed instead on other audience members, which again prompted more fists and more yelling. More guards rushed in. They held up their guns and shot warning shots. At least I think they were warning shots. I was too focused on the door and leaving to confirm. I swam through the swarm of guards, nearly getting shoved over until I was several feet away from the entrance. I panted, trying to catch my breath. They get like that at the end, but Lord, do they calm down quickly, said a voice behind me. I turned around to see another middle-aged man. He wore a simple button-up shirt tucked into his jeans. His hair, while admittedly a bit greasy, was at least combed nicely and parted to the left. His gray face was dominated by this broad smile. He was thin, but not in the same way as the others. Not like the others with their skin stretched tightly over their bones. I immediately distrusted him. "Is this your first time?" he asked. I didn't answer. He chuckled. "Look, I'm gonna be up front. I saw what you did there, and I think you have a talent for this type of thing. So I'm gonna give you my business card. Ain't no pressure or anything, but if you're ever in need of some easy cash..." "I don't want your card," The man's smile faltered slightly. Do you know you can get fined for eating food meant for the entertainers? Well, let me tell you, we've had a lot of your type before. We had to go straight to city council. It was this huge thing. I mean, of course, we don't really enforce it often, but still, I'd take the card if I were you. He handed me his business card. Chester N. Talent Acquisition. I'm not going to call this, I said. He chuckled again. Almost everybody does. Now sometimes they wait until they're hungry enough to be desperate. By then, we don't usually want them anymore. They're too skinny. I didn't respond. I just headed to my car. And when I got in, I sat in silence for a while, doom scrolling through my phone. As I prepared to leave for my mother's, I noticed that the man was still there by the entrance. He was talking to someone. I brushed up against the window for a better look. It was definitely that Lewis guy from the gas station. I recognized him almost immediately, but I had nothing to say to either of them. The drive to my mother's was surprisingly uneventful. By now, I was accustomed to dodging ambulances and drivers falling asleep at the wheel. There were accidents, sure, but none that I was involved in. I watched people screaming at each other from the side of the road, but they were too weak to be a serious threat to anyone. Everything was so futile here. My mom's new house was not a house, but a trailer. Parking my car, I stared at the tiny, nondescript buildings surrounding me. I didn't understand why she, who in my world had a decent amount of money, was living here, but I was tired of trying to understand. I just knocked on the door.
You look amazing,
was the first thing she said. She inspected me through her stringy hair. A smile grew across her hollow face.
Thank you,
I said. I expected more animosity based on our phone call.
Well, come on in.
She rubbed my shoulders firmly.
I don't have an extra room, so you're gonna be sleeping on the couch. Hope that's okay with you.
I sat awkwardly on the leather couch and nodded. She sat across from me in an old rocking chair that I vaguely recognized. I think it was my grandma's. The last time I'd seen it, it was in an old attic. I had no idea what to say to her, not only because I never really knew what to say to my mom, but also because I didn't know what our relationship was like here. I didn't even recognize this woman. I was also confused by the 2 years of radio silence on my part. What could have happened that would have kept us separated for 2 whole years?
Mom, I'm sorry. Sorry about what happened.
She laughed.
You're sorry about what happened? Nothing happened except you deciding that you don't want to be my daughter anymore with no explanation.
I searched for the right words, but there was nothing to be said.
I'm sorry,
I repeated lamely.
Are you a feeding pig?
She asked suddenly. She scooted forward.
What?
She laughed.
Please, do you think I'd believe you look like that on Vernon's salary? I'm not stupid, Alice. So tell me, feedings? Sugar daddies? What's your story?
I go for scraps, I said, half lying in an attempt to explain my appearance.
I'm not doing entertainment. You should.
She sat back against her seat with a dejected pout.
You'd make good money, you know.
I know. We sat in silence.
Well,
she said finally,
I'm going to sleep. Don't expect breakfast in the morning.
She left me alone in the living room. Besides the couch, the rocking chair, and a small TV, the room was completely empty. No pictures on the wall, no coffee table. Part of me wanted to explore, but I didn't want to offend her. She'd always been so sensitive. So I laid down on the couch, reading through my messages for clues on, well, myself. I wondered what happened to her now that I got here. Maybe I had always been here and simply forgot. Although, that wouldn't explain the sudden weight gain. Unfortunately, I had deleted all of the messages between my mother and I. I just looked through the messages from Vernon instead. They were similar to the ones I remembered, just simple questions and clarifications on when we'd meet. As I was scrolling through, I got a new message from him.
Let me know if you need money.
I hesitated. Although Vernon made a lot more than me, I still had enough saved up to survive on my own. I checked my accounts. Some of them had different passwords than I remembered, so it took some time to access them. I didn't want to believe the statements. I was in too much debt. I had no idea where I'd even start. I'd also stopped receiving checks from my job. Searching through my email, I found the reason why. I was laid off a few weeks ago. Apparently, I'd gotten into a fight with a customer. Given how people act around here, it didn't really surprise me too much. Still, I really didn't want to take any money from Vernon. I'm okay for now, I texted him.
Are you still thinking about becoming a feeding model?
I gasped. How did he know about the card? Although I wasn't considering it, not really. It would be too humiliating. Unless maybe the other me wanted to? I don't know who I am. How could I? I turned off the phone and fell asleep. I woke up to cold water poured on my head. I sat up immediately and wiped my wet hair off my face. A stranger stood before me in a robe. Or at least, I thought she was a stranger until my recent memories identified her as my mother. Anger creased across her bulbous face as she snapped her fingers at me.
You lying whore! She yelled. Look what I found in your purse!
She threw Chester's card at me. What are you talking about?
You told me you weren't working at Feedens, she howled. And what do I find? You're working for Chester? How long have you been doing this?
Mom, relax. He just gave me his card. I'm not gonna call him.
Don't be ridiculous. Of course you'll call.
She sat down next to me, slightly less angry, but still pouting, and I noticed a heavy scent wafting from her mouth.
Only an idiot would waste an opportunity like this.
Again, I was incredibly confused. Opportunity? What? I thought you were screaming at me because you thought I was doing feedings. My mom laughed.
Oh, Alice. Alice, you're just like your father. So clueless. Of course, I'd like you to do feedings. What I don't like is lying in my house. What I don't like is people with money trying to scam me. If I thought you were a successful pig, I'd have charged you $100 a night.
She laughed again. This person, she was not my mother. She looked like her, somewhat, and she talked like her, but her mood swings were never this erratic. I tried to reason with her, but she wasn't having it. She was talking as fast as an auctioneer, and frankly, I didn't understand most of what she was saying. All I gathered was that suddenly I wasn't an uncomfortable nuisance in her house, but a long-lost best friend. She ushered me into the kitchen, humming loudly.
Sit down,
she chirped as she opened the refrigerator. I looked inside. It was almost empty except for a gallon of milk and a head of lettuce. She tisked and opened the freezer.
Did I tell you I'm retired now?
She asked, grabbing a bag of frozen dumplings.
I don't know,
I said truthfully. I tried to change the subject.
Mom, do you have any old pictures of Dad? I was thinking about him.
Her mood soured immediately.
I don't want to talk about your father.
So instead, we made small talk while I ate my dumplings. From this, I learned my life had been incredibly similar to what I remembered. I still went to the same college and met Vernon around the same time. Apparently, I grew up in the same house, but my mother sold it so she could have enough money to work on her figure. I had noticed she was a little heavier than most people I'd come across. She drank 3 cups of milk as we spoke.
Of course, by the time you start making money, I'll probably have enough to buy a bigger space,
she told me. It didn't even bother me that she just assumed I'd give her a cut. It was the nicest conversation we'd had in years. I know many people won't understand why I agreed to call Chester. After what I saw, it would be idiotic to consider re-entering the arena, especially as the main attraction with hundreds of eyes staring down at me and leering. Listen, I knew my mother's affection was fake. I knew she just wanted some of the money she had been so enthusiastically assuming I'd be making. But even though most of our relationship has consisted of her constantly degrading me, I still loved her. It still seemed like she was the only person I had now. Also, I have to admit that the idea of modeling appealed to the child in me. Like most kids, my younger self desperately wanted fame.
"You're so lucky they're scouting you,"
she said as I helped her clean the kitchen.
"Better than wasting your time auditioning."
When I was in middle school, my mother and I would watch her old audition tapes. Before I was born, she'd wanted to be an actress, and she was great at dissolving into her characters. I almost believed that she was a 1900s immigrant or a Greek goddess. Unfortunately, she was never pretty enough, never skinny enough. By the time I was born, she was just too old. So after breakfast, I called Chester. A secretary picked up. According to her, Chester was selective about who he scouted, so a space was available in the afternoon. When my mother heard that I could get a meeting the same day, she hugged me tightly and offered to drive. The first hour of our drive, it was great. In the bright early daylight, gaunt skeletal figures were far less intimidating. I didn't even pay them much mind on our 1-hour drive into the city. This changed, however, once we got closer to Chester's office. Like in my world, the nice neighborhoods slowly morphed into poverty-stricken streets. I'd been to this neighborhood before. Nothing violent, just people swaying awkwardly and chatting into the air. They made me feel guilty and uncomfortable in my world. Here, I was terrified. I'd never seen dead humans before. I'd imagined they'd be like mannequins. Eyes closed, maybe a little bit of blood, but in good condition. I was wrong. You know, I tried not to look, but the smell itself was horrific. Even in the car, I was coughing. It smelled like a sewage plant and like sticking your head to a barrel of rusting pennies. I could taste the sour iron on my tongue as the putrid rot worked its way into my brain. After the first corpse, I kept my eyes closed, but my perverse curiosity forced them to squint open. Through this, the streets became a nightmare of blurry snapshots. A man lying, his green skin marinating in the sun, maggots crawling through his stomach, a child, gender ambiguous, with fingers thick as wrists, their eyes falling from their sockets, another figure that was unrecognizable under the layer of maggots, small animals chewing casually on corpses, two men running at each other holding butcher knives. When I closed my eyes, the screams, they seemed to amplify. Not loud screams, but low grunts and moans. I imagined hundreds of people fucking on the sidewalk. This made me laugh, which made me feel guilty. I covered my ears as well. Finally, we pulled over. My mom chuckled to herself as she parked the car.
"Such a sensitive girl. You've turned into a real pussy, you know that?"
As we got out of the car, a man in a tattered suit lunged at me, biting deeply into my shoulder. I screeched as his teeth penetrated the skin, shaking his head back and forth like a puppy playing tug of war. I flailed wildly, awkwardly smacking his chest, but he easily restrained me. I tried to drop to the floor, but he held my body up. He bit down harder and dragged his teeth down my arm. I watched as blood covered his lips. We made brief eye contact as I desperately tried to pull away. It wasn't the pain I felt as much as the fear. Suddenly, his body went limp and he collapsed against me, knocking me to the floor. I stood up and backed away. My mom stood over him, casually yanking the knife from his neck. Blood gushed over him, some of which splattered on my bare legs. I didn't expect it to feel so warm.
Get in quick,
my mom said. I didn't have time to think about what I'd seen as she shepherded me into the building.
Call me when you're done, okay?
There was a large man with a gun inside. He smiled politely and redirected me to the third door on my left. He kept his hand on the gun and scanned behind me. I expected a waiting room, but instead I was immediately in a small office with one desk, 3 chairs, a computer, and a green rug on the floor. On the floor was a dog cage. Inside, a woman slept. She wore a short skirt, tights, and a yellow bra. Occasionally, she mumbled something unintelligible in her sleep. "Hope you don't mind my secretary," the man said. "She gets tuckered out around midday." "It's okay," I said, sitting in one of the chairs across from Chester. I didn't want to insult him by commenting on the sketchiness of this whole operation. I'd mentally prepared for it to be sketchy, so it didn't bother me as much as you'd expect. I tried to forget about the man lying on the street and fiddled with my earrings. I'd wondered if one typically brings a resume to this type of interview, but since I had no previous applicable job experience, I decided against it. I, for my part, dressed nicely in one of my mother's loosest sundresses. "Okay, let's get this over with so we don't waste each other's time. Frankly, I saw how you did out there last night. That, and the fact you were willing and able to drive around here and get here in one piece, that tells me you're a good fit. Most of my bookings will be in these types of places, and you won't believe how many girls refuse to travel. Do you understand?" I nodded. "Everything, it's off the books, paid in cash. I can't guarantee the types of crowds you saw yesterday. Probably most of what I can get for you will be private parties. Someone's birthday or retirement, that sort of thing. Of course, the longer you stay, the more people will see you. The more demand there is, then I can book bigger and bigger events. Maybe 100 or so people. Nothing crazy like parties." "We represent entry-level clientele. Does that make sense to you?" I nodded again. Perfect. Give me your email and cell phone number. You'll receive 15% of your first event, along with tips. Both the percentage you earn and the tips you can expect to receive will increase as you gain more experience. That all sound good to you, honey?" I nodded. "Before you start, I'll send you an email with the address and the instructions on what to wear. You get paid the day of. I'll probably have something booked for you by the end of the week." I was about to nod, but then I hesitated. "Wait, if it's 20 a person and there's only like 5 people?" "Listen, private parties pay extra and by the hour. Which reminds me, since they are paying for the premium experience, they'll probably expect more from you than the stadium crowds. They usually ain't shy about it neither. They'll tell you what they want. Obviously, you're free to ignore some of their requests, but that will affect your tips and the likelihood I can find you more gigs." "How much can I expect to earn weekly?" "Well," he hesitated, but his smile remained just as wide. "Our top-paying girl gets $4,000 a week." I did the math in my head. $4,000 a week meant more than $200,000 a year. But this was just one girl. One success story. Who knew how many others failed? "How much will I be expected to earn the first week?" His smile began to falter. "Well, I can't promise you an exact figure since it may take time to find people interested in watching you. What I can tell you is that the lowest amount a girl has ever been paid is $100 for an event. And girls average about 3 events a week." The more I listened, the less interested I became. He seemed to sense this, since he fidgeted with his bag and threw something at me. I caught sight of it and stared at the shiny package featuring an overweight cartoon girl spilling out of a spaghetti-strap dress. He threw 4 more at me, and they landed on my lap. "Course, one of the best benefits of the job is the Kinoko bars. I don't know if you've heard of them. I shook my head for the first time in his office. Although the name did sound vaguely familiar.
They're probably before your time. They were a craze of the early 2000s, but the USDA thought it would mess with food prices. So they got the FDA to ban them. Published some bogus studies. Anyways, you can look into them if you want. It's an obvious scam. Just be careful where you eat them and you'll be fine. Anyway, you get 5 a week no matter how much you book. It's 1,000 calories a bar.
I pictured my mother happily humming over the dumplings. I thought of how much money she spent on food. She could easily maintain her goal weight if we had these bars at home. She'd be so happy with me for obtaining them. I imagined how she'd hug me after I told her the news.
Okay, I understand,
I said. I stood up to shake his hand. He grabbed mine and then added,
one more thing. We do monthly weigh-ins. If you want higher tips without the less savory aspects, I'd recommend you put on some weight. The bars, they will help.
He took a few pictures of me, some of which, I'm embarrassed to admit, were of me undressed. He told me he'd update them in about a month if I made progress. As I left the building, I looked straight ahead, ignoring the body that lay a few feet from our car. On the drive home, I covered my eyes, covered my ears, and hummed loudly. I buried my nose in my shirt. Unfortunately, from my short walk to the door, some of the stench had clung onto my clothes. For the first time in my life, I smelled of death. For the next few weeks, I didn't leave the trailer except to occasionally visit my mother's friends. As I rapidly gained weight from the Kinoko bars, my mom enjoyed showing me off to relatives. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and neighbors, they became my proto-audience. They didn't expect any performance. I'd just sit there and answer the same boring questions. They'd ask me about Vernon, work, and hobbies. Most of what I said was likely a lie, but they didn't know any better. And frankly, neither did I. My mom had fully committed to her role as a supportive 1950s style housewife. Every morning, she'd make me whatever I wanted from breakfast, at least from our limited pantry, and never asked for rent or expected me to buy my own food. Despite my insistence that I could cook for myself, she didn't trust me in the kitchen. Apparently, the girl she knew was a terrible cook, and I really didn't feel like contradicting her. She also took 2 Kinoko bars for herself each week, but she let me keep the other 3. Honestly, she really liked watching me eat, as if the pounds appeared instantaneously after each bite. I had gained some weight, reversing what the intermittent fasting had done to my body. Still, I was never particularly large, just curvy with broad shoulders and some mild cellulite. Normal human things. Even after the hourly meals and Kinoko bars, I was on the skinnier side. Vernon, my Vernon, wouldn't have minded the few extra pounds I gained. I'm sure the constant compliments from relatives soothed my ego as well. Strangely, I began to fear losing weight and disappointing my mother. As we opened up to each other, we finally began to talk about father. We even looked at some pictures together. It hurt to see him, thin as a needle. He looked impossibly long. His typical cheerful grin was replaced by a frown surrounded by loose skin. His arms seemed to drag as if his body was melting. My mother and I, beside him, were skinny, but not like him. He must have sacrificed his comfort for us. The last picture of the 3 of us was taken when I was a teenager. I guessed that he died a few years ago, and this was confirmed by an offhand comment from my mom. Unfortunately, the longer I stayed with her, the more my mother began to grow suspicious of me. Since we hadn't seen each other in 2 years, I could explain some of the changes in my personality, but there was only so much I could pretend to know. For example, I had never even heard of our current president. or any of the newest, overweight pop stars. To compensate, I'd spend hours on Wikipedia until I had a vague notion of how the current world worked. When I made a mistake, she brushed it off. In this world, it's not uncommon for young people to be mentally underdeveloped, as she put it. It turns out that starvation really doesn't help much with childhood development. On the Thursday of the third week, Chester finally called and said he had booked a bachelor party for Saturday at 12 a.m. The flat rate would be $1,000, but there was a potential, Chester told me, to make up to $10,000. The party was in a relatively wealthy neighborhood in the bachelor's basement. I would have to stay for at least 4 hours to receive the full $1,000. If I left early, the rate would be cut significantly. That night, my mother and I had a feast. She bought us a pizza and a 6-pack of Dr. Pepper. I enjoyed how my stomach swelled after and how my mother patted it affectionately. I no longer slept on the couch. Instead, my mom had bought me an old mattress that was marginally more comfortable. As I lay there that night, I texted Vernon. He'd been on board with me living with my mother once I told him she was closer to the feeding agency. Like my mother, he'd heard of the enormous salaries girls can make in the business and thought I could easily work my way up. Like my mother, of course, he wanted a cut of the cash.
I'm surprised you're getting along so well with her.
He texted me in the middle of our conversation we'd been having on the opulence of the aforementioned meal.
Of course I'd get along with her. She is my mom.
There was a momentary pause, during which I doom-scrolled through a successful feeding model's account.
Does she ever talk to you about what you two did to your dad?
Without thinking, I texted back.
What are you talking about?
Oh, Alice, you know what I'm talking about. Do you still have the video? Sometimes I can't fall asleep thinking about when you showed it to me.
Rapidly, I looked through my camera footage. The food I had eaten earlier was migrating to my throat, and I breathed heavily to keep from spewing it out. I had no idea what video he was even talking about. Everything I'd saved was relatively wholesome, save for some pictures I might not be able to share at the dinner table.
I didn't save it.
I did. I saved the email you sent. Couldn't let myself get rid of it.
I scrolled through the emails I had sent to Vernon and found the only one with a video. The file was entitled LOL. I clicked on it. There was my mom and my dad, sitting beside each other by the fireplace. My mom was laughing and wore a sundress. My dad, the haggard man I'd seen in the photos, was soundlessly crying, his head hung low. I heard sniffling coming from behind the camera, which shook erratically, blurring the scene.
Okay, I'm ready,
my mom began. She breathed, bringing her arms down in a fluid, calming movement. Her laughter, however, found its way through her voice as she spoke.
Okay, Alice. Why don't you start by showing us how pretty you look?
The point of view shifted, and I saw myself, a younger, skinnier version of me, snot dripping down my face, which I desperately attempted to wipe with my sleeve. I wore a simple green dress. I could tell from how high my cleavage was that I was wearing a push-up bra. It shifted back to my parents. My dad was still looking at the floor.
I'm sorry, Alice.
His voice shook.
Please, forgive us.
You're a waste of space,
my mom said, still laughing.
Do you even know how much I'm charging for this video?
My dad shook his head, snot dripped down onto his lap, which earned a cackle from my mother.
$12.99,
she said. I heard more sniffling behind the camera.
That's what you're worth, you piece of shit,
my mom said. I watched as my mother fished a knife out from below the couch. She stabbed it non-committally into my father as if swatting a fly. He screamed, and she took it out only to stab him again. Blood poured from his chest. It dripped onto the couch. She stabbed him again. this time more forcefully, and his body sagged into the couch as his eyes lost all expression and he stopped swaying in his seat. With her shaking hand, my mom sliced a small piece of flesh from my dad's face. She held her head back and swallowed it whole like a seagull. She then cut slowly against his ear until she pulled the whole thing off. She grabbed the camera from me and threw the ear in the air. I caught it with my hand and she looked at the camera.
Go on, Alice. You can do it.
I swallowed it, choking and coughing as my mom laughed. There was an hour of the footage, but that was all I could take. I exited the email and deleted it. I never wanted to see it again. I don't even know how I watched as much of it as I did. Sometimes, it's not healthy to accept reality. Sometimes it's easier to let yourself think that the video of you and your mother consuming your father was just some makeup and prosthetics. I let myself think that, but I did believe Vernon's text a few minutes later.
Kinoko bars really fuck with your brain. Just be glad your mom stopped taking them before they got too out of control.
I remembered what Chester had said about Kinoko bars, and I did some research. No matter where I looked, the consensus was ubiquitous. Kinoko bars were as dangerous as bath salts. Although consumers felt no immediate high, it was associated with an increase in risky behaviors such as nymphomania, kleptomania, and cannibalism. The effects were felt almost immediately in large doses. This time, I couldn't hold back my vomit. I didn't want to. I wanted everything out of me. I ran to the toilet, but missed by several feet. My feet still smelled after washing them in the shower. The next time I vomited, I managed to make it into the bowl. I lied to my mom and told her we were out of Kinoko bars the next morning. Told her I binged on them the other night. In reality, I threw the whole box outside in the trash can, making sure to cover it with paper towels. Mom had been proud. I decided I'd move back in with Vernon right after the feeding, but I didn't tell her. Truthfully, I was scared of her. Truthfully, I was afraid of myself. Since I saw that, since the other night, I couldn't trust myself. At least Vernon, though weakened by hunger, likely had a better chance of restraining me. The evening before the bachelor party, my mom and I sat in silence. She'd made lasagna, and though it was delicious, I couldn't bring myself to eat more than a few spoonfuls.
Saving your appetite for tomorrow? Smart, she said. By the way, Cousin Griffin sold me some Kinoko formula the other day. Way overpriced and probably nothing compared to the bars, but I'm hoping it will help a bit. I've been cooking with it. You don't even notice the taste, huh?
I dropped my spoon.
I need to be excused.
Once again, I ran to the bathroom. I vomited as much as I could. I didn't wait for dessert to fall asleep. About halfway through the night, I woke up to someone kissing my forehead. I opened my eyes. Mom was sitting beside me, stroking my hair.
Mom? Yes, honey?
I was too exhausted to pretend.
I miss Dad, she sighed. Your father was a great man. I miss him too.
I sat up, startling her.
Then why did we do it?
She didn't answer for a while.
Your father, he couldn't work. You know that. We needed the money. It's not our fault. He volunteered, you know. I just wish I could have sold more copies before the crackdown.
I remembered how happy she'd seemed in the video. But she was an amazing actress. Maybe she had loved him. Maybe it was just the Kinoko bars messing with her brain. Either way, I started crying as she brushed my hair to the side. I knew that to survive, I'd have to be like her. I couldn't be like my father, who easily threw his dignity aside. I needed to honor my hunger. Any disgust I'd previously had dissipated. It's not our fault. Nothing's our fault in this world. My mother stood up and walked away. I felt for the knife under my pillow, and I held it tightly. I spent the next morning preparing for the big event. I packed some props and found a matching bra and underwear set at Target. I even found a pair of cowgirl boots to wear with them, just as Chester had suggested. Now, I was never exceptionally talented at doing my makeup, but I didn't have to be. Most of it would come off if I cried, and I knew I would cry. Most models do. I thought about every possible outcome of the night. Death, molestation, none of it scared me anymore. I didn't feel anything after last night. I packed several bags of props and carried them to my car. I said my goodbyes and told my mother I loved her. It was a short drive. I arrived an hour early. An older man let me in and helped me carry my bags down into a nicely decorated basement. It was almost as large as my apartment, with a kitchen, a bathroom, workout equipment, couches, and bean bags. In the middle of the room were plastic lawn chairs. The closest row was about 10 feet from the wall. On the floor, there was a black tarp. I assumed I'd be performing there. The old man and I plopped the bags to the side.
Thank you so much for doing this. You know, it means a lot to my son,
the old man said. He slipped a $20 bill into my underwear and left me to wait for the bachelor and his friends. I spent the next hour on my phone. As I was getting bored, I noticed a small cage in the corner of the room. I looked inside. A small white rabbit, surprisingly plump, lay chewing mindlessly on a head of lettuce. Each chomp decimated the head further until its only remains were streaks of green around the rabbit's mouth. I reached in with my left hand, hoping to pet it. Instead, it bit me sharply, drawing blood. Then it hopped back to its house, its red eyes glaring at me from the shadows. The boys staggered in around 12:15 a.m. Each wore a tuxedo in various stages of undress. The shyest boy had simply undone the jacket, while the wildest one leered at me in his socks and boxers. Except for the bachelor, they each carried a few grocery bags with them. There were about 10 of them, and they ranged in age from late teens to early 30s. I was annoyed by how healthy they all seemed. Obviously Nepo babies. Almost all of them howled and shouted comments at me as they tripped over themselves, struggling to find a seat. There were more chairs than people, and instead of sitting next to each other as you'd expect, they sat in small groups of 2 or 3 scattered across the rows, some awkwardly dragging chairs around to use as footstools. Some of the boys politely held their grocery bags in their laps, while others threw them on the floor or onto another chair. A few fished out beer bottles and began drinking. One of the boys stepped onto a carton of eggs and began to curse profusely until his friend dragged his tuxedo jacket on the floor. He smiled as if he'd cleaned efficiently, instead of simply smearing the yellow puddles into long streams of goop. After a few minutes of drunken chatter, the bachelor, who looked like a birthday boy in his silly triangle hat, stood up.
And this, my beautiful friends, is a human dumpster,
he said in a loud, theatrical voice, and waved his arms in a sad attempt at showmanship.
She will eat anything you throw at her.
He grabbed my head and pushed it backwards so I was staring at the ceiling. He held a handful of cherries over me and dropped them one by one in my mouth. I lurched forward onto my knees and coughed rapidly. I could still breathe, but I definitely had something in my throat. After I punched my stomach a few times, a smaller cherry, about the size of a grape, landed in a puddle of spit in front of me. I picked it up, smelled it, and chewed it in 2 bites. It tasted sour. Some of the boys in the front row threw quarters at my face. They clapped and began throwing food on me. Eggs, bananas, cereal, cake, bread, gallons of yogurt. The boys in the furthest rows, realizing their obvious disadvantage, ran up in front of me and poured directly on my head. As I tried desperately to consume all I could, they became vocal, shouting rapid-fire demands at me. Now, I couldn't follow a single word they were saying, as their requests had turned into a cacophony of barks in my ears. I couldn't even focus on eating since I had to constantly wipe at my eyes. By now, they were starting to burn. The boys continued yelling indiscriminately until the bachelor suddenly clapped loudly and a silence washed over them.
Everybody calm the F down.
Jesus Christ!
He sounded genuinely annoyed and maybe even slightly embarrassed.
You want us to raise our fucking hands too, Mr. M?
The pantsless boy said. The old guy sitting next to him laughed. That's actually not a bad idea, I said quietly. I stood up and folded my arms over my chest. By then, I was completely covered in food and smelled like a broken refrigerator. It would be a lot easier. It's my first time doing this sort of thing. For the first time, everyone, even the shy boy who had yet to make eye contact, stared directly at me. A few of them laughed, although some nodded their heads. She's right. We should go easy on her. Maybe go row by row, the bachelor said, shrugging. We've got 4 hours anyway. We really don't want her breaking right away. Some of the boys booed loudly, including Pantsless and his old friend. But anyone could tell by the way the bachelor glared at them that this was not an acceptable position. It was also decided that, considering the amount of mush on me and the floor and their limited supply, that they would cease firing at me until later. They were very pragmatic for a group of drunk idiots. The guys who were standing in front of me, the ones who had thrown food directly into my face, found seats 2 rows back. Unsurprisingly, the bachelor, whom I suspected to be the least drunk, gave the first request. He wanted me to eat until I puked.
That's stupid. She's supposed to do that anyway,
said a chubby, pale blonde. The bachelor put up both his middle fingers.
Fuck you!
Another boy said.
This is Mark's night. He wants to be a pussy.
Let him,
said one of the boys in the front row. He had a curly black mullet and wore his sleeves up, exposing several bright tattoos.
Fuck you!
The boy said again. His head hung limply to his shoulder as he stuttered,
Fucking deek!
The chubby blonde stuck his foot out, kicking my shin indirectly. I tripped, but regained my balance.
Start eating, dumbass!
Most of the audience laughed. So I awkwardly dropped to my knees, and, well, I ate. I stuffed myself, scooping up handfuls and chewing just enough that I wouldn't choke. As I was chewing a large handful of crumbling chocolate chip cookies, the blonde kicked me again. I swallowed and kept eating, ignoring him and the chance as best I could. A lot of them told me to go faster, and unfortunately, something compelled me to do so. I began swallowing without chewing. It burned my throat and my eyes, but I couldn't stop. Even after I vomited, I just couldn't stop. The boys had grown almost completely silent, just watching me stuff as much as I could manage, vomit half of it out onto one of the grocery bags, and then stuff more back in. Of course, some shouted to vomit on the floor, but I refused. I would not crawl in my own filth. I ate almost everything they'd thrown at me within minutes. Then, I grabbed the knife from inside my bag and pulled it out. The man with the mullet gasped and looked around. When he saw that most of his friends looked calmly at me, some even clapping, he forced a smile while he fidgeted in his seat.
I have an idea,
I said.
Who here wants to be my assistant?
A loud whoop came from the back, but it was a shy boy in full garb who quietly said,
I do.
His friends clapped and grabbed his shoulders. Some of the boys who had been drinking raised their glasses in a toast. The tall blonde boy stood up and began clapping enthusiastically. When he saw that no one was joining him, he sat back down.
Come here,
I told the boy, who, through the chance I had come to learn, was called Rory. I grabbed his hand. I'm not embarrassed about anything that happened at that party. Usually, I'm a squeamish person. But that night was the exception. I laid Rory down on one of the piles of food. He was smiling, but his eyes were blank. He got up on his elbows and looked around. His boys were staring at him expectantly. He sighed and laid back down. I had cut a long streak on his stomach, causing him to flail his arms. I almost laughed as I imagined him as a frog leg jumping in the pan. He cried, but then bit his lip. His nervous smile morphed into a wince. I held his hand, and he squeezed mine.
"You're beautiful,"
he suddenly whispered.
You don't have to do this."
He was wrong. There were at least several voices screaming at my body to stop, but I couldn't. Or maybe I didn't want to. It's so hard to know what you want when you're desperate. Rory, too? He was desperate. But he didn't struggle as I leaned over and sucked from his open wound. His blood tasted like warm ketchup that someone had poured into the ocean. Now, the taste did not overwhelm me. After a while, it was as if new taste buds had blossomed on my tongue. He was no longer metallic, but sweet, like thick honey oozing from the cone. It stuck to my lips and trembled down my body and Rory's. I lifted my head and looked into Rory's eyes. He was now smiling at the ceiling, his head rocking slightly back and forth.
God damn,
the mullet boy said from the audience. The bachelor shushed him. Everyone was watching me intently. Before, they thought I was funny. Now, their gazes, they felt reverent. Their posture seemed to improve. No longer frat bros, but devout churchgoers listening intently to the sermon. I had to laugh just a bit. Rory, for his part, was the happiest sacrificial lamb. In his mind, I knew he thought there was poetic justice in our joint performance. He'd felt so guilty for watching me. He was wrong, however, to feel guilt, for I felt no embarrassment, only the hunger which now consumed me. Poor Rory. He really didn't deserve it. But neither did I. If this way was the role that I needed to play to satiate myself, then I would do it. I mean, after all, Rory wanted it. And the crowd, oh man, the crowd, it enjoyed it too. Growing bored of my vampiric game, I dismissed Rory. "Go back to your seat." He struggled to get up and fell over my lap. His friends stood up too as if to rush to him, but I told them to wait.
I can't move. So dizzy.
He groaned into my thigh.
Jesus Christ, you're annoying.
I rolled him off my lap. I stabbed him once in the heart. Blood spewed from his mouth and he clasped at his throat, but he was too tired to fight. The boys and I watched in almost oppressive silence as slowly the life dissipated from Rory's body.
Holy shit! He's dead!
Pantsless broke the silence with a loud cry. He ran to Rory's body and I casually sliced his ankle. He fell to the floor and clawed his way towards me.
You fucking bitch!
I stabbed him in the head and he stopped moving. I said. Didn't expect it to be that quick. You have a choice, I said to the boys who watched, completely still. Some were silently crying. Others had serene smiles. The bachelor was laughing, biting his hand to keep his voice down. Their behavior wasn't particularly shocking. I'd read earlier that it was common to mix Kinoko with alcoholic beverages, especially at big parties. Like me, they were hungry for something more. You can easily come here and grab the knife from me. I am sure it would only take 2 of you, maybe even 1. Then, I guess you could do whatever you wanted to me. You could take revenge on me, you could turn me into your slave, but then of course, you'd miss the show. I chewed on Pantsless's finger, easily flaying the flesh off. I gnawed at the bone, making eye contact with the bachelor. No one came forward. I chuckled. I knew from the first time I saw the knife that I was in no danger. I opened the bags I'd brought and, bag by bag, spilled my mother onto the floor. Although I'd kept her in the fridge for most of the day, her body had already started to decompose. It looked slightly green, and its smell turned to rotten milk on my tongue. One by one, they grabbed a part of her, a hand, a foot, parts of her leg. They brought the flesh back to their seats, and they began chewing. They were hungry too, and once they'd eaten the flesh, they sucked the bone and attempted to bite through it. They stared at me as if waiting for instructions. I began to cut off parts of Rory and Pantsless. Like the boys, I bit the skin off a little at a time. The outer layer of the skin had a texture similar to beef jerky. The lower layers were softer and had a taste like melting iron. I'd come to appreciate every taste the body had to offer. We all ate slowly, contemplatively, then lavishly, our jaws strengthened by our need.
Cut them open,
The bachelor said coolly after finishing my mother's nose.
cut them both open, and we'll see what's inside.
The others nodded in unison. With my knife, I sliced through Rory's tuxedo. Then I sliced through his skin from his neck to his navel. At first, there was only a long, thin red line. Then I cut deeper, and blood began to leap into the air. Underneath the skin, yellow fat glistened like warm butter. I dug deeper, my fingers disappearing into the warmth. Oblivious to anything besides the body, I sliced through the fat and the muscle, which seemed to shiver reflexively. The muscle, it was tight and stubborn, like slicing through a thick rope. I cut, I hacked, I dug my knife as deep as I could. My hands finally slipped below, and so felt the thick warmth inside of him. I pulled him open, examining the coils inside. I clawed into him. I lifted as much as I could above my head. His body offered himself to me, exposing new layers. A couple of the boys rushed forward, greedily leaning into me. Together, we pulled from inside him in a vicious frenzy. Blood covered us as we ripped apart organs. Like pigs eating from the trough, we were indiscriminate in our consumption. I didn't know what I was eating. Sometimes I smelled ammonia and tasted a grainy rubber, like biting into a basketball. Sometimes I was biting into a kitchen sponge. Mostly, I tasted his blood, coating the roof of my mouth. His bones pressed into me the deeper I dug. The boys waited for me to finish before they all rushed in to eat what they could. I focused now on Pantsless. I climbed on his back, looking down at his exposed neck. Cutting through him was harder. The muscles on his back were stronger. I pushed into him with all my strength, cutting through the skin, the fat, and the muscle until I reached the rib cage. I stabbed my knife into the bone, and it caught. I tried again with no success. Instead, I ate the fat beneath the skin, a greasy, waxy taste. I pushed him over and began working on his front. After consuming his organs and some of his flesh, I began killing the others. It was easy. One by one, they just gave themselves to me. The old man, the blonde boy, the mullet boy, the drunk ones, the ones who had seemed to sober up slightly. Some laughed, others cried. A few tried to fight, but they were easily restrained by the others. I stabbed them quickly in the heart, and they all fell to the floor until it was just me and the bachelor.
Thank you,
He said. He looked down at his friends. Tears landed on his cheek and on the floor.
I've always been too scared.
I nodded.
Me too.
I handed him another knife from my bag of props, and we proceeded to open the others. Each had a slightly different taste and feel. The bigger boys had more rigid muscles. The chubby blonde was mostly fat, delicious and sweet, like pork lard. The older man's muscles tore apart easily. His blubber tasted like sour sweat. We ate, stopping only to puke. The bachelor sliced at the mullet boy's head, sawing it in two with all his strength. He couldn't get through the vertebra, so the head hung, slightly distended in a pool of blood. Muscles, like tendrils, dangled from it. We ate it, pulling the skin and muscle apart like string cheese. We cut limbs, we cut fingers open, we chewed as much as we could off the bones and licked the blood clean from them.
I wonder if Mittens would like this,
the bachelor said an hour into our feast, momentarily distracting me from the nails I'd been biting through.
Mittens? My buddy!
He laughed hysterically and ran, stumbling over the bodies to Mittens' cage and opened it. He waited a few seconds before grabbing the shaking rabbit. He dropped the rabbit onto Pantsless's head. The rabbit hopped off, but the bachelor dived into the bodies and grabbed it. Unfortunately, he grabbed too tight. The bones cracked. The body twitched twice, and then it was still like a stuffed toy. Unlike young men, bunnies are incredibly fragile. The bachelor cried, holding the bunny to his heart. I grabbed the rabbit from him and bit into its fur, savoring the light, airy flavor. The bachelor turned away. His quiet tears grew louder and louder into shrieks. He scooted backward, away from the bodies. He shook his head and his arms. It was as if he realized for the first time what he had done.
What the fuck?
He screamed.
What the fuck did you do?
He fumbled for his knife and held on tight. I let go of the rabbit and held on tightly to my own knife. If I could just stab him quickly before he turned around and lunged at me, stabbing erratically at my legs and arms. His screams were gasps of air, and he repeatedly cursed as I swung back at him, nicking him and drawing minor blood. As soon as he backed away, I stood up. I faced him as I walked backwards towards the door. I knew he was stronger than me, probably stronger than most men. As much as I wanted to taste him, I valued my own life more. He lunged at me again, grabbing my legs and knocking me down. We fell together, landing on top of the bodies. Half of his arm submerged into the chubby blonde's cavern, and he pulled it out quickly. A panicked howl escaped from his lips. I landed on Rory, my foot temporarily inside of him. Easily, I pulled it out. Crawling on my elbows, I reached the bachelor quickly and stabbed him in the neck. Blood sprouted from him like overgrown weeds. Futilely, he slashed his knife at me. It cut some of my hair and my bra strap. I grabbed his hand with two of mine and pulled his fingers off the hilt. As I wrestled the knife away, it slashed my hands. Laughing, I stabbed him again on the other side of his neck. He looked like Frankenstein with two bolts sticking out from him. I straddled him. I pulled the knives out of him, blood squirting like a water fountain. I threw the knives to the other side of the room. Then, I drank from it. His blood was the sweetest. Warm Irish butter on my lips. It took him a few minutes to die, during which I drank him like a fine wine. It was the pulse of life. It was warmth. It was a summer day in my childhood when I jumped headfirst into the pool and gagged on chlorine. How could I explain that, despite the pungent, bitter taste? I wanted to drink more. I wanted to burn from the inside. I closed my eyes, the sweetness growing inside of me like strands of grapes. It grew until it was only me and the blood, united as one. The bachelor, he was simply a vessel, a glass bottle. There was no humanity in him. No humanity in me either. Just blood and need and the absolution of need. No food, no body, no soul could compare with this sweetness. Rory's, it had tasted like vinegar in comparison. My stomach swelled, my body tingled and seemed to float above itself. I floated through the roof, landing in the hard dirt. Are you okay? Once again, I was in the forest. That man I had seen weeks ago, he was back, looming over me with an outstretched hand. I took it, and he helped me to my feet. My God, he looked like a tick swollen with blood. You know, even his dog's belly, it dragged along the forest floor. The whole thing, it just made me laugh. This guy had lost, 20 years since the last time I saw him? His skin, even though it sagged slightly with middle age, it looked bright and beautiful. Even his voice, it sounded youthful and full of gusto. "Sorry," I said. I'm just a little dizzy." My stomach growled as I stood up. "Sounds like you should eat something, ma'am," the man said, smiling warmly. "Maybe I should," I said. I checked my watch. There was still time to make Vernon some dinner. After he let me pet his dog, the old man and I, we headed our separate ways. The dog did lick at my scabs, and you know what? I let him. I was less dizzy this time. Physically, sure, I was hungry, but mentally, I was satiated. I headed out of the forest. Everything just seemed brighter, less ominous. Louder too, though, with the animals chattering, and some of the noises I imagined, they were of attacks, like predator against prey. I felt for both. Outside the forest, the park was full. Children screeched excitedly, bumping into each other as they vied for the slide and the swings. Parents watched, some on their phones, while others engaged in small talk with one another. The two children who had drunk from me before were now sitting on a bench. They were both pleasantly plump. They chewed on an ice pop and scrolled through iPads. This was the life I remembered. Excessive, perfunctory, and beautiful. There was no hunger here. There was no anger. Happiness, annoyance, or mild boredom was emitted from every person. Bellies were full, and minds, they were almost empty. They didn't understand the beauty of their existence. In my car, I called my dad. Obviously, he was shocked to hear from me. We spoke for several minutes before he told me he'd have to get back to work. He asked if I'd like to have dinner with him and Mom. I declined. I had invited him alone for a pizza night. He refused unless my mom was invited. I hung up. As much as I loved him, it was clear he loved her more. Back at the apartment, I ordered pizza, and Vernon and I, we ate in front of the TV, and for him, it was just another night, But for me, oh God, it was a chance to catch up. I ate a few slices, but the taste, it was mediocre at best. He went to sleep early. I stayed up on my phone, and I watched him intently as his chest fell and rose like the ocean's tide. I was still hungry. Glittering Horse 287, I raised this white claw to you. This story was something else. All right? I don't really even know how I would try to describe it to somebody in a way that would do it justice. We're basically talking about Alice in Hungerland. Okay? And the characters that you portrayed in here, especially the mother and Chester, I just loved those characters, and I don't know why. Maybe it was because I had a lot of fun doing their voice work. Maybe it was the way you characterized them. I don't really know, but there's something about them really spoke to me on a deep level when it comes to creepypasta characters. And I think that this world that you crafted, which I don't know what you're going to refer to it as. I'm referring to it as Hungerland to go along with the Alice in Wonderland themed. I think that we should revisit Hungerland at some point. I loved the story. I think that you did an amazing job. Thank you very much for reaching out and submitting this story to me directly. It has been an absolute pleasure doing it. It's the longest story I've ever done by far. It's taken me a bit longer to get out than I thought it would, but I think this final product is well worth it. And I hope all of you in the audience agree. And if you liked this story, please go take a look at the links in the story notes. It's got all the links to the actual text story itself. Go support Glittering Horse. And guys, don't be shy. Please like and subscribe to my channel. And in the comments section, let me know who was your favorite character in this story. All right, I am exhausted and I am absolutely ready to crash between just getting back from a bachelor party and putting this whole thing together. So God bless everybody. Have a wonderful night. Peace out.
Uncle Magnolia.